Kim Ki-jin proceed his speech, I would like to introduce Professor Kim Jin. Professor Kim Ki-jin is a professor at Department of Physical Education, College of Education, Keimyung University, Daegu, Korea. He got PhD in exercise physiology from Graduate School of Sung Kyum Kwan University, Seoul in 1993. And now he is a professor at Department of Physical Education, College of Physical Education, Keimyung University, Daegu, Korea. And his position is a president of Korean Academy of Kinesiology. His research interest is in exercise physiology and biochemistry. And the main topic of his research is examining the effect of exercise training and dietary modification on metabolic syndrome associated with obesity, type 2 diabetes, and atherosclerosis. In particular, he is investigating the relationship between of gene and of phenotype in Korean population. He also interested in assessing the response of cytokines and immune factor to exercise training in obese and metabolic syndrome patient. And there are some peer review article in English edition. One of them is about the effect of ladder climbing exercise on atrophy hypertrophy related myokine expression in middle-aged male with star rate. Based on his experience and expertise, right now he will proceed an article about exercise training and mitochondrial dysfunction and ER stress of cardiac muscle in aging and obesity. So, welcome, please welcome Professor Kim Ki-jin. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Ki-jin Kim. I'm working at Keimyung University, Department of Physical Education in Keimyung University in Daegu, Korea. So today, I would like to express really my honor in this chance for Kiro's presentation in 11th Asia Conference on Kinesiology. Today, my presentation topic is exercise training, mitochondrial dysfunction, and ER stress of cardiac muscle in aging and obesity. As you know, the aging and obesity is drive risk factors for structure and functional degradation of the cardiac muscle, especially reduced contractility and the muscle mass reduced. So as cell loss or hours reactive hypertrophy in aged heart. Especially the metabolic change from qualitative and quantitative change in the mitochondria and the fluctuation in level of oxidation stress factors itself, and the calcium signaling structure in cardiac structure in muscle. So we are very important for the maintain the health state in aging process in spite of old person. So we must try to enhance mitochondrial biogenesis of the heart for maintaining heart function and prevention of cardiac disease. So aging and so especially the physical inactivity drive the sarcopenia and obesity, sarcopenic obesity. Sarcopenic obesity so showed the inflammatory expression of inflammatory cytokine, accelerated loss of muscle mass. So this situation is driven by the mitochondrial biogenesis dysfunction, expression, depression, and activation of inflammation, and decrease of immune function. So in the long run, can be risk factor for drive the metabolic syndrome and the cardiac dysfunction. In the process, so our heart is compensate hypertrophy. So especially in very main situation, for example, so as you can see, mitochondrial energetic in the depression, so inotropic response, depression, and so decrease cardiac contractility and the cardiac output, depression. So in the many risk factors for development of heart failure. Nowadays, and many previous studies suggest in the it's good treatment method for prevention of depression of cardiac function. So we can suggest exercise training program. So my friend Hugo Guy and and the other professors suggest exercise training, attenuate age-induced elevation in Beck's and Richard-2 ratio, apoptosis, and the remodeling in the heart in that. So as you can see, so exercise is good information, good treatment for the prevention of impaired cardiac function. Many research so suggest very different factor, various factors for the cardiac cellular and molecular remodeling factors. As you can see, there for contraction and relaxation machinery, exercise training is a good method, as you can see. So today, in the firstly, I checked the infraction of long-term endurance exercise training and the calorie restriction. So that study is so treadmill learning with aerobic exercise, endurance training, and during every weeks, and the calories reduction to 65% of daily total consumption. And mainly, that time, so we checked the change of mitochondrial biogenesis marker in cardiac muscle for high fat, high induced obese mice. So summarize the result, as you can see, diet restriction and calorie restriction and exercise treatment, so more activity NADH. So NADH means so the Krebs cycle markers, mitochondrial biogenesis basic marker, and SDH activation, but and without significant difference as compared to normal diet. Especially basic markers for mitochondrial biogenesis require too. As you can see, exercise as compared to high fat diet. So as a group. So exercise treatment after exercise training, the more activation. So we can suggest exercise training suggests the more activation mitochondrial biogenesis. And the cytochrome C, so of course, so in spite of without significant difference, but we can suggest the more active exercise treatment. So exercise training or caloric restriction significant decrease of body weight as compared to control group. But in Euro's exercise treatment, the more increase the mitochondrial biogenesis or cardiac muscle, but caloric restriction you can suggest. So therefore, endurance exercise will be more effective method for cardiac protection than caloric restriction. So we can suggest exercise training is a good treatment for the more activation of the mitochondrial biogenesis activation. And the next, so we are very interested to TRAF. TRAF2 means tumor recognition factor related receptor associated factor. Receptor marker, TNF receptor marker, and the SIRT1. How is the impact AKT activation and autophagy marker in cardiac hypertrophy? So we are applied the two treatment methods: diet control and exercise innovation. And so main factors for TNF alpha and the TRAF2 and the SIRT1 pathway and through the AKT and FOXO pathway. So, for example, as you can see, this diagram of our research trial. So, high-fat diet drive the more activation of TNF alpha. Because TNF alpha more the TRAF2, AKT activation, how is it impact the mTOR pathway and the FOXO pathway. So, as we are our hypothesis of cardiac hypertrophy through the TRAF2 and the SIRT1 and AKT mechanism by high-fat diet in obesity induced and inflammation. That's the way. So this result we are trying to the cell culture. So inflammation marker in main factors TNF alpha. As you can see, TNF alpha treatment to increase the concentration. We can find the more activation TRAF2 and show the depression of SIRT1, as you can see. And this arc is duration of culture marker, treatment marker, as you can see, and the concentration and duration, and as you can see, duration drive the depression of SIRT1, and the more increase of concentration, the more activation of TRAF2, and the more depression of SIRT1. Especially so resveratrol. Resveratrol is so, as you can see, as you know, the SIRT1 activator marker. And the nicotinamide markers, so SIRT1 inhibition marker. And the activation marker resveratrol, and the more activation FOXO, and as compared to control group. So resveratrol, so SIRT1 markers, so the more activation FOXO1 we can suggest. And the second cell culture trial, so this time, the first the TNF alpha culture treatment and the ICAR and the nicotinamide treatment. As you can see, ICAR means so a kind of exercise training marker. So nicotinamide in the exercise training inhibition marker.
Hello?
You can see.
Hey, hold on. Let me lower the volume first.
Next,
Okay.
Suggest
Okay.
peptide TRAF2 the more activation, TNF alpha the more activation TRAF2, and the more depression of SIRT1. So AKT phosphorylation markers you can suggest as compared to hyperthyroid and the TNF alpha markers, the other innovation, or for example, so just before, so ICAR markers exercise effect more activation, and the POXO, as you can see, almost similar activation. So we can suggest, of course, diet and hyperthyroid induced and the more activation TNF alpha. And as you can see, the pathway TRAF2 and AKT. And exercise innovation, we can suggest the inhibition of TRAF2 activation and the SIRT1 activation and SIRT1 activation and the inhibition of AKT activation. So SIRT1 effect to the POXO mark, I think we can suggest. Of course, this result, just before we are all just on the cell culture trial. So summarize this data. As you can see, TRAF expression is the more significant of regulation, and so increase of TNF alpha cell culture. And ICAR culture, we can suggest ICAR research result, so we can suggest the positive effect of exercise innovation. So remarkably inhibited the upregulation of TRAF2 expression and AKT oscillation in cardiac hypertrophy. So this present experimental study in cell culture demonstrated that TRAF2 solved as well important to mediate and enhance the cardiac hypertrophy by activating AKT pathway. But the exercise training is very positive effect for the inhibition of TRAF2 in cardiac hypertrophy. Of course, summarize this data, we can get a result, we can get by the cell culture study. Next time, so we are try to application of in kind of in vivo trial, so animal study. So topic is effect of 8 weeks calorie reduction and resistance exercise on hypertrophy and autophagic markers, how it changes of cardiac muscle in hyperthyroid induced obese middle-aged lad. Of course, this study resistance training exercise is used to the ladder climbing exercise. Yeah. Of course, this trial is solved with STAR-LAB. So can be divided into 4 groups: control group and the diet control group, and second, and the third is the resistance exercise group, and the diet and the resistance combined. Yeah. So sample collection in muscle, especially to where experimental markers is consist of TRAF2 and AKT, mTOR, and the FOXO marker, and kappa B, and beta-actin, so marker. Of course, the first in the 6 weeks hyperthyroid-induced obesity, after hyperthyroid-induced obesity, and next trial to be a diet control or exercise trial of 8 weeks. As you can see, figure 1 food consumption change. Of course, diet-induced obesity duration and body weight change, of course, increase during the diet-induced obesity duration. And the treatment during the after training and the exercise and the diet control, as you can see, the combined group is shown a significant decrease as you compare control group. Of course, in the control group, diet control and the resistance exercise only, the combined group shows significant difference. Yeah, by the way. And the weight of tibialis anterior muscle almost similar. Hard weight, you could not find the hard weight, and the muscle weight, the extensor digital longus muscle. As you know, the extensor digital longus muscle is aorist muscle during the climbing exercise. As you can see, the visceral pathway, the significant decrease as you compare control group and treatment. As you can see, diet control and the combined exercise group. Post-relation in AKT, we cannot find the significant difference in group. But the next TRAF2 marker is, as you can see, control group, diet, as compared to diet group, and the other treatment group, the diet control and the exercise group is significant decrease, and the NF-kappa B and the mTOR as well. So these factors for exercise training and the diet control is a good trial method for the inhibition in the cardiomyopathic or cardiohypertrophy. And this third one, so mitochondrial genesis markers, basic markers, and you can see it is treatment group, diet control and resistance exercise group. You can see the significant increase of activation. And the POXO, in the case of POXO, population of POXO marker, the more activation, you can see. Treatment. So, we are calorie restriction with the weight loss or resist training as red climbing exercise may be effective method in prevention of cardiohypertrophy and the other cardiac problem, as you saw. Yeah, you can suggest. So, one more time, we can suggest through the combined cell culture experimental trial and animal study. So we can suggest, so exercise treatment is good method for the inhibition of TRAF2 marker and the AKT phosphorylation. So it's good. So the result of this study is expected to provide key evidence to support the benefits of exercise training and maintaining cardiovascular health and preventing heart disease through the mechanism of inhalation. So obesity equal reduction of mitochondrial biogenesis. So aging and obesity, as you can see, just before I told you, is main risk factor for cardiovascular disease. In this situation, we can suggest in the very important markers endoplasmic reticulum stress. So 3 major of ER stress markers, TORC, PKR like ER kinase, and leadership to requiring IRE and activating transcription factor. especially PULC in the case of a key stress in a contact site. So MOF, mitochondrial, so associate ER membrane. And the primary ER stress is physiological and physiological and the toxic, and the degradation of calcium and the damage of ER. But so in the exercise strategy is good method for inhibition in this pathway is the main ER stress mark. So aging and obesity that drive the ER stress, but exercise and so inhibition marker is good try. Yeah. So as you can see, exercise strategy, especially this pathway, the more activation age metabolism, so we can suggest the main factors for visual alpha. Yeah. So the exercise induced physiological carbohypertrophy, so marker. How is the impact of exercise strategy? We can suggest two main pathways. For example, resistance exercise and the aerobic exercise. So you can see, so impact of different impacts. For example, main impact. So as you can see, resistance exercise, the size is concentric left ventricular hypertrophy, concentric left ventricular. But at the aerobic exercise, eccentric left ventricular hypertrophy. Of course, so as you can see, cardiac wall is the more secret and both exercise impact. But in the just aerobic exercise, the more wide the left ventricular wall, the dilatation markers and the contraction and the dilatation to more active. It's not different, I think so. Yeah, so exercise is the other very mitochondrial biogenesis. You can see very positive impact exercise strategy. When we try to do exercise strategy impact, but try to perform the exercise strategy impact, so the very important factors, PPA, beta, delta. PPA delta is mark is very important marker. So how is it? We must try to analyze to perform the comparison of the endurance exercise with trial learning between endurance exercise and the resistance exercise with the red climb. So on the focus of changing mitochondrial biogenesis and the ER stress in diet-induced obese cardiac muscle. Can choose this method. We can divide it into three groups: the sedentary control, and the resistance exercise, and the aerobic exercise. As you can see, red climbing resistance exercise and the treadmill learning aerobic exercise. Of course, at the 6-week diet induced obesity after treatment and the 12 weeks treatment innovation. We compare this result. Body weight case, in the case of, as you can see, aerobic exercise is significantly decreased as you compare the other two groups. And the heart rate, you cannot see significant difference. So we can suggest, but PET, in the case of PET rate, as you can see, the aerobic exercise group showed the significant difference as compared to the other two groups. And mitochondrial enzyme activity, basic markers for mitochondrial biogenesis, and both exercise strategy group is significant more activation as compared sedentary control. And the PULC contact site, the ER stress marker, as you can see, so both exercise group showed the significant depression, and the CHOP indicates almost similar tendency. But GRP7A is the more inhibitions ER stress marker, but we cannot significant difference. And the PGH1 alpha, as you know, the basic important marker of mitochondrial biogenesis. As you can see, both exercise training group is showed the significant more activation. But AMPK we cannot find, we could not find the significant difference. So chronic ER stress could oxidative stress in the inflammatory response. Obviously, say we observe so increase the mitochondrial biogenesis and decrease the ER stress after resistance exercise training, comprising lead climbing exercise and aerobic exercise as consisting of treadmill running. Suggestion: so aerobic exercise training and resistance exercise training, both exercise training can contribute to the prevention of aging and the obesity associated decrease in cardiac function. Just before I told you, the important marker suggests I suggested PPAR delta. Yeah, PPAR delta. How is it change of PPAR delta? So what main function of between mitochondrial biogenesis and ER stress? So we try to do this chow and high fat diet, and chow and exercise, and high fat exercise. So of course the exercise usually so lead climbing exercise. Yeah, see this type exercise. So as you can see, so see the chow diet and exercise, and the pet diet and the pet diet plus exercise. So chow diet exercise group significant decrease of body weight, and the visceral fat in the exercise, and the chow and the exercise group showed the most lower, most usual visceral fat. And the SDH and the chow diet and exercise groups showed the significant more activation. And cytochrome, the basic mitochondrial biogenesis marker and the Krebs cycle marker, as you can see, the exercise group, the more activation. And the pet diet group is the significant depression. The PPAR delta and beta, as you can see, pet diet plus exercise group, the more showed the more significant activation. But we cannot suggest the significant decrease. PGH1 alpha in the control chow diet exercise group showed the significant more activation. And the contact site in the ER stress marker in the PULCO, as you can see, exercise group, two exercise group showed the significant inhibition. And CHOP case in the red marker, so a more activation in pet diet. And the exercise group showed the tendency to significant depression. But in the similar with our previous studies, we can not suggest significant difference in GRP7A. So as you know, the high fat diet is how it changes ER stress and mitochondrial biogenesis. So this effect to drive the cardiac dysfunction and cardiac problem. But exercise, so the wall activation and this pathway inhibition, you can suggest. Especially, so intermittent radiocarbon exercise training and reduced caloric intake, so combined method and can be suggested the good method for the decrease of the ER stress and the prevention of cardiac damage, in obesity and aging. Especially, so we are very interested. So mitochondrial associate ER membrane contact site and the reactive oxygen species, how it changes. So this point is very important also. So we can suggest, so aging and obesity, the work, the ER stress, cardiac problem in the lower cardiac disease, but the late climbing exercise and the reduced caloric intake is a good try this inhibition method, ER stress marker. And this pathway, PGH1 alpha and the PIPA beta is a good marker. So, so we can suggest this data. So the concurrent stimulation from exercise training is more effective through the inhibition, PARK and CHOP expression, or the activation of PGH1 alpha and PIPA beta and delta, beta or delta, actually so. So almost concluded exercise will impact. So exercise treatment for the good method improvement of physiological function and the prevention of cardiac problem, pathology with aging. And so especially prevention of impaired cardiac function and aging obesity. And the main results suggest point is resistance and the aerobic exercise training and through the inhibition of endoplazmic stress and the mitochondrial biogenesis dysfunction, and especially on the contact side. You can suggest. Thank you very much for your attention. So this picture is the eighth conference of Asia Conference on kinesiology. Our campus market, our members. Thank you very much. So I would like to compose so without the COVID-19, so we can meet again. Actually, so you must careful for maintain for health state and the prevention of COVID-19. Actually, so thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kim. It is some interesting presentation and also beautiful substances of this material. So we still having 5 minutes for discussion. So I would like to invite audience to have comment to Professor Kim presentation. Please raise your hand and I will give opportunity to someone who raise their hand or want to have comment to Professor Kim presentation. Please. Any question or comment for Professor Kim?
Pawan.
Yes. Okay, Dr. Dicky, please. You.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Pawan. Very interesting presentation, Prof. Kim. Okay, this is the research about the high fat intake for the models of the animal. How about the correlation with the lipid profile with this research? Is there any correlation with about the lipid profile that as a result from the high fat intake in this research? Thank you, Prof. Kim.
Please, Prof. Kim. Thank you, Dr. Diki.
Thank you very much. Yeah. You mean that the high fat diet and high fat diet profile after treatment high fat diet profile?
Lipid profile. Lipid profile.
Oh yeah, exercise treatment.
No. He question about lipid profile.
Lipid profile, because of this research about your presentation about the high fat diet.
High fat diet lipid profile.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
With the correlation with this
so
research.
Our usually, of course, as you can see, the test very trial to high fat diet. So high fat diet, of course, so the increase of high fat diet calorie almost above 45% of high fat diet. You know, so usually, in the child diet, mean at the 15 or 20%, but almost so the above the 45% of high fat diet. Okay. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Welcome.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Diki and also Prof. Kim. Is there any question from audience? One more?
One question, Prof. Wawan.
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof. Kim, for your presentation. It's very interesting study. So previously we try also a high fat diet using our CHO. However, it's very difficult to increase the blood glucose. So is it possible to combine the high fat diet with fructose to make the higher blood glucose or maybe type 2 diabetes? This is the first question. And the second question is, did you also examine skeletal muscle or maybe the effect of the high fat diet and the exercise in the muscle physiology and pathology? Thank you very much.
Okay. You two questions. The first, you will how is the impact of diabetes, the parameters, and the second second question is how is the impact of skeletal muscle activity? Yeah, the first time. So in this presentation, I cannot suggest our data. So on the focus of insulin resistance, yeah, usually so it usually almost result. So after treatment, exercise and diet control combined after treatment, so we can find to improve the insulin resistance. So this markers, so oral glucose tolerance test, we can get, and just only focus over the cardiac muscle, but cardiac structure, but the other data, we have data the skeletal muscle. So usually skeletal muscle is SIRT1 and the AMPK and all the mitochondrial biogenesis. Or next time, if I have gathered the presentation, so I can suggest this data. Almost after treatment, we can find improve the skeletal muscle in the molecular activity and or the focus of mitochondrial biogenesis mark. Right? Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Prof. Kim.
Welcome. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Nur and also Prof. Kim. Actually, we have a fruitful discussion, but we have limited time, so we should finish our discussion and also presentation of Prof. Kim. So please give applause to Prof. Kim for his amazing presentation. Please give applause for him.
Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, and I will close this presentation with give some conclusion that high intensity or long-term exercise training have been shown to increase the numbers of and quality of mitochondria. Furthermore, physical exercise has shown to reduce the level of oxidase and to protect muscle cells by increasing the activity of antioxidant enzymes that is associated with peroxisomes proliferator activated receptor beta theta, both AE, which result in weight loss, and high intensity RE, do not accompanied by weight loss, protect obese cardiac muscle effectively. The combination of the intermittent ladder climbing exercise training and a reduced calorie intake can decrease the level of ER stress-related protein that contribute to cardiac muscle damage in obesity and aging. That's the first presentation of our plenary session, and then finally we close our first session by one more giving our applause to Prof. Kim. Thank you, Prof. Kim, and also all of audience who have attention for this fruitful and also amazing presentation. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Supported by
Thank you very much, Prof. Kim, for the insightful presentation, and thank you, Prof. Wawan, as the moderator of the first keynote lecture. Ladies and gentlemen, after this, we will have the second keynote lecture by Professor Emmanuel Stamatakis, PhD. The topic is about the 2020 WHO Physical Activity and Sedentary Behavior Guidelines and the Future of Kinesiology or Physical Activity Research. The moderator of this session is Dr. Denny Agustiningsih, MCAS AIFM. But before we start the session, we would like to take a picture first with the speaker and also the moderator. So I would like to invite Professor Emmanuel Stamatakis and also Dr. Denny to join the photo session. Okay, are you ready? I will count down in 3, 2, 1. Okay, once more. In 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you very much. So now I will give the time to our moderator, to Dr. Denny. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Etta. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, the participant of the ACK 2021. Thank you for your participation this morning. Now we arrived at the second keynote. We will learn from Professor Manos about the 2020 WHO Physical Activity and Sedentary Behavior Guidelines, and also Prof. Manos will give us insight about the future of kinesiology or physical activity research. Before we start, I would like to introduce you who is Professor Emmanuel Stamatakis or Professor Manos. Professor Stamatakis is Professor Manos is a professor of physical activity, lifestyle, and population health from School of, and also he is an NHMRC Senior Research Fellow at the School of Public Health. Professor Manos is a member of the Charles Perkins Centers. He completed his PhD on physical activity and childhood obesity at the University of Bristol. And then between 2003 and 2014, he was based at University College of London, where he initially led the development and implementation of physical activity measures in large-scale nationwide epidemiological surveillance studies. He is one of the he has a lot of manuscript publication at a reputable journal, and also a lot of review that he act as a peer review journal, and also he has a lot of awards and honors. Not for long. I think we will give Prof. Manos the time for a presentation about the 2020 WHO guidelines and also the future kinesiology research. So, Professor Manos, the time is yours. I think you have 30 minutes for presentation, and then we will have a question and answer session for almost 10 minutes.
Do I have 30 or 40 minutes?
If you like to 40 minutes, so we only have 5 minutes for discussion, yeah. But if you can present 30 to 35 minutes, so we can discuss more. It's up to you. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Danny, for your kind introduction. I would like to first of all share my screen, and I would like to ask you to please confirm that you can see my screen okay?
Okay, it's okay. Clear.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. I'm sorry I cannot be with you because of COVID. I was very disturbed and very sad to hear the news about Indonesia. I know that you're having a massive outbreak, over 100,000 deaths. So my thoughts and my best wishes to you, to your families. Please keep safe, and let's hope that the world will move forward, and the COVID will be a thing of the past soon. This is what Sydney looks like at the moment. We're on the second month of lockdown. It's a lockdown that almost certainly will be prolonged by another 1 or 2 months. There are some advantages. We're fortunate to be allowed to go out and exercise. So for people like myself who cycle a lot, Sydney is a very nice place in a way, because the streets are empty. There are hardly any cars out there. So there are some positive things perhaps for about COVID-19. I have structured my talk today into two sessions. These two parts are very closely interlinked. So in the first part of my talk, I will give you an overview of the WHO physical activity guidelines. And in the second part, I will give you an overview of where the field of physical activity, or kinesiology, as you prefer to call it, is moving in the future, in terms of the future direction that the field is taking. And I will be referring more to epidemiological research, which is my discipline, but not only. So in the first part of my talk, I will cover the following areas. I will give you an overview. What are the guidelines? Why do we need them? How they were developed? What are the main recommendations? So what was the outcome of these guidelines? And what is new? These are not the first guidelines. The WHO had put forward physical activity recommendations back in 2010. So let's start from the very simple thing. So what are these guidelines? It is a set of recommendations about how much physical activity and what type and what intensity of physical activity different population groups should do. These guidelines have been developed through a very thorough, very rigorous, very systematic process using very high WHO standards. My role in those guidelines, I was the co-chair of the guidelines development group throughout the process, and I also led the subcommittee which developed the adult physical activity recommendations. Why do we need guidelines? Why did we spend 2 years, over 50 people, 50 scientists and WHO personnel over 2 years to develop these guidelines? I'd like to share a little story with you. I was in Melbourne at the end of 2019, halfway through the guidelines development, and I gave a seminar about the development of the guidelines. We didn't have the guidelines then. And I had a professor in the audience, professor of physiotherapy. At the end of my talk, she goes, "Why do we need these guidelines? Why do you spend all that time and energy? Is it not enough to simply tell people just do more physical activity?" Not quite. The question was rather naive, I have to say. Not quite. Guidelines serve some very important functions in public health, science, clinical practice, communication with the media, and epidemiological research, surveillance research. And I will give you an overview of each of those main functions one by one. So first of all, the most obvious function of these guidelines is that they are scientific consensus. For the scientists, for 2 years, they were reviewing the evidence, evaluating the evidence. And at the end of that process, not only we concluded and we came to a consensus about what we know, but we came to a consensus about what we do not know, and we need to do more research to cover it in the future. The second critical function of physical activity recommendations is that they form the amounts, the recommended amounts that the guidelines came up with. They are used in public health interventions. They are used in policies. They are used in clinical prescription. So, for example, a clinical trial or a clinician will be advised by the WHO or equivalent recommendations about how much physical activity they should recommend their patients. So, public health guidelines like WHO's have both public health functions and clinical utility. They're used in clinical settings as well. They're not only for advice to the general population. Third important function, messaging. So these guidelines is how, as scientists, communicate physical activity messages to the general public, how clinicians communicate messages to their patients, how us and clinicians, researchers and clinicians communicate messages to media people, journalists, for example. So very important function. A messaging tool, the guidelines are a messaging tool where we share with the general public what activity they should do and how much they should do. And also, of course, raise awareness about the importance of physical activity. We know how important, how critical physical activity is for health, and its absence is causing a lot of disease, premature death, and compromise in human life. And last but not the least, the fourth critical function of public health guidelines is health surveillance, what we call health surveillance. In other words, these are systems that many countries have, the US, the UK, for example, Australia, they have These are measurement systems, surveillance systems that continuously monitor the health of the nation, year in, year out, or periodically, every 2 or 3 years. Now, the guidelines will be the yardstick, will be the measure by which we will evaluate progress with physical activity in the future. For example, one global study here published a few years ago, it's about the prevalence of physical inactivity. This is surveillance. This is health surveillance. 2 million participants from all over the world. And as you can see, we don't make any progress whatsoever with physical inactivity. At least it's not getting worse, but has been exactly the same. The problem has been exactly the same for the last 20 years. So this is a typical example of surveillance. From this point on, from 2020 on, we will be using the WHO recommendations to evaluate progress with physical activity. You will excuse me for 1 second because I need to turn off my heater. My room is getting very, very hot. I would like to also highlight that the 2020 WHO recommendations were an update. We had recommendations in 2010. They were far less detailed. They were quite basic. They only covered 3 population groups, and they didn't have the depth and they didn't have the detail. And of course, this is normal because physical activity, kinesiology as a field is thriving. There's a lot of exciting research. A lot has happened over the last 10 years. So the 2020 guidelines reflected the fairly high standards of the evidence that we have accumulated in the last 10 years. I've already mentioned that about 40 scientists got involved in the development of these guidelines. If you look very hard, you may be able to see me somewhere there as well. But we also had WHO personnel, technical personnel, external reviewers, and the whole, the first draft of the guidelines was subject to a public consultation, and 400 additional scientists got involved and provided feedback to the initial guidelines, and then we revised them, of course. So the scientific community in its totality, public health community, got engaged very, very closely with these guidelines. It is a collective effort. In terms of the key milestones, the process started in the middle of 2019. We had 2 meetings in Geneva. The second meeting was in February 2020, just before COVID kicked in. I managed to come back to Australia a few days before the borders closed, which was very lucky because if I hadn't come back, I would still be in Europe a year and a half later. And the guidelines after the internal development, the exposure to the public health consultation were also subjected to internal, very, very rigorous internal review by WHO, by the WHO Guidelines Review Committee for 3 months. And we eventually were approved in September 2021 for publication at the end of November 2020. The first thing, I will give you a few examples of the process. So the very first thing we did is to come up with the questions, the PICO questions. Many of you will be familiar with this PICO structure, population exposure or intervention, comparator and outcome. The questions that are systematic reviews of the literature we would like to address. These are the actual questions. I will give you here the free, the more accessible interpretation. Basically, our literature researches and reviews addressed these 3 questions. Is physical activity good for health? Is there a dose response? What is the dose response? How much physical activity should we do? Or how little sedentary behavior should we do? And does the type and the domain, the context of physical activity matters? And these are 2 words, domain and type. These are 2 words I'll be using a lot. So I would like to explain what domain is. It's a very, very important categorization. So by domain, we mean what is the context of physical activity, where it happens. Happens in the domestic environment at home, housework, cleaning, doing dishes, hoovering. Does it happen, do we do it for fun, recreation, health? That's recreational or leisure time. Does physical activity occur at work, or does it occur for transportation, going from place to place, walking to work or cycling to work, for example? On the other hand, type is not the same. There's a subtle difference here, because we can have the same type of physical activity. For example, cycling. Cycling can happen in leisure time if we do it for fun, recreation, fitness, health. Can be part of occupational activity if you are a postman in Australia. In Australia, postmen do have bicycles still, or transportation, if we use it to go from place A to B or cycle to work. I could not think of a better example. I don't think that cycling can happen in domestic environment, but if you do carry your home around on a bicycle, I guess that could be categorized as domestic cycling. It's rather rare. I haven't seen any of those here in Australia. Once we decided about the questions that the review of the guidelines review will address, then we decided about the health outcomes. It's a very long list of health outcomes, including mortality, cardiovascular disease, mental health, cognitive function, quality of life. It's a very, very long list. So I'm not going to go through them one by one. I would like to explain and bring to your attention that every group for which we developed a separate guideline had a different set of outcomes. And that decision was based on various factors, including availability of the literature and specificity, importance of a specific outcome for that particular population group. We reviewed evidence from mid-2017 to November 2019, just over a couple of years. The reason our reviews did not go back all the way to 2010 is that we took advantage of the American physical activity guidelines, the physical activity guidelines for Americans. The report had published very shortly, about 1 year before the WHO guidelines process started. And the Americans did an amazing job. 100 scientific personnel over 2 years. They did amazing reviews, very deep, very detailed. So we used their reviews for the period 2010 to 2017. Most of the evidence that we and the Americans reviewed was observational, epidemiological evidence. And the reason is that there are very few randomized controlled trials out there. And both the Americans, WHO, we only reviewed few. In other words, we did umbrella reviews. We did not review original studies. Now, I would like to give you an overview of the various guidelines. There are many guidelines. There are 7 different guidelines for different population groups, but there's a lot of similarity and overlap. So what I will do is I will I will summarize the main recommendations, and then I will for those population groups that simply adopted the guidelines of the core ones. So this is one of the core ones. The guidelines for children and adolescents aged 5 to 17. So our review and all this of synthesizing and distilling the evidence and categorizing the evidence for its quality and rigor resulted in the WHO Committee Guidelines Development Group recommending that all children and adolescents should do at least 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity on average. Moderate to vigorous is the activity that if you walking fast, for example, or running. So 60 minutes a day across the week. In addition, children and adolescents should aim for vigorous intensity activity that strengthens their muscles and their bones. So typically, active play will be sports activities that involve jumping, climbing, running, and things like that, lifting and things like that. Mostly for younger children, that will be play. For adolescents, perhaps it will be sports. Playing basketball, playing football, things like that. And for the first time, the WHO set of physical activity guidelines includes specific instruction about limiting the amount of sedentary behavior children and adolescents spend every time sitting, particular focus on screens, tablets, smartphones, and screens, recreational screens. This guideline was also adopted for children and adolescents living with disability, pretty much in exactly the same form. Of course, for children who live with disabilities, they have to adapt activities. Sometimes they're chair-bound, sometimes mobility is an issue, but the quantities and the frequency and the areas of coverage are identical. I'm not going to talk about this in detail. Now, this is the second core, the most important in the sense that we reviewed the most literature. We reviewed approximately 35 reviews for the adults' recommendations. And the adults' recommendations were the basis for a number of other guidelines, recommendations for other groups. So the first recommendation is that all adults should be doing at least 150 to 300 minutes of moderate intensity activity per week, or 75 to 150 minutes of vigorous intensity physical activity per week, or equivalent combinations of moderate and vigorous. Moderate is, as I said before, the equivalent of brisk walking. Vigorous is the equivalent of jogging, running, or playing sports, playing squash or swimming sometimes. Like in children, there was a specific recommendation about strength promoting exercise. For adults, the recommendation is 2 days per week. There is no specific amount attached to it, 2 days per week only. And the reason is that there is not enough evidence to support a dose response to support high specific amounts. So it's as long as someone does 2 sessions of strength promoting exercise, push-ups, that could be gym-based exercise, push-ups, chin-ups, sit-ups, all these qualify for strength promoting exercise. For the first time also, WHO guidelines specifically encourage to exceed the recommended amounts. So for additional health benefits, these guidelines acknowledge that additional health benefits will be accumulated if we exceed, if adults do more than 300 minutes of moderate or more than 150 minutes for vigorous. And here for adults, again, for the first time, we have the inclusion of limiting sedentary behavior, sitting time, and replacing it with physical activity of any intensity, including light intensity physical activity. No specific amounts are recommended here because the evidence is not there yet. We don't know with certainty how much light intensity physical activity should we do. What is the maximum amount of time we should spend sitting? We don't know yet. The evidence is still growing. So hopefully in 2030, in the next version of the recommendations in 2030, we will have these answers. And another innovation of the 2020 WHO guidelines is a hybrid recommendation, a combined recommendation covering both physical activity and sedentary behavior. That recommendation says that for people who spend large amounts of time sitting, because, for example, have an office job, so they have to be sitting in front of a computer, or they work as a truck driver and they have to be sitting in front of the computer. People who do a lot of sitting, they should aim to exceed the recommended amounts. They should aim for what you see on the screen, top right-hand side corner, more than 300 minutes and more than 150 minutes. This is a very important recommendation that showcases, highlights how the complexity of the evidence and the sophistication of the evidence that allows us now to start looking at different aspects of physical activity, different aspects of movement in a combined manner. Another very important innovation of the 2020 WHO guidelines is that we do not have a minimum duration for physical activity to be beneficial. the 2010 guidelines used to advise that sessions of under 10 minutes did not count. So the advice was that all physical activity to be health promoting, to be health enhancing, should last for at least 10 minutes. It's very complicated and a long story why this was in the previous guidelines. We now know that this is not, this is incorrect. This is incorrect. There is no evidence to suggest that physical activity has to be in continuous bouts of 10 minutes. 6 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, if it's high intensity, even 30 seconds to 1 minute, physical activity, provided that it's repeated regularly, can be beneficial. We know that with quite a high degree of certainty, and this is one of the areas that we'll expect will expand. I will talk about this in the second part of that. And we are moving now to older adults, adults aged 65 and older. Many similarities with adults recommendations. The range is exactly the same. 2 sessions per week of muscle promoting, muscle strength promoting exercise is the same like with adults. For older adults, we have an additional recommendation though, saying that on 3 days per week, older adults should do multi-component exercise, multi-component physical activity that promotes balance and strength. What is it, multi-component exercise? Activities like yoga, like Tai Chi, activities, functional exercises like chair squats, wall push-ups, all these things that train more than one attribute of fitness, balance and strength, for example. And the main thinking, the main reason why we came up with this recommendation is that balance is critical, balance and strength are critical for falls prevention. Falls and fractures from falls, it's a major health issue in older people that cost lives, cost independence, and cost very high expenditure in healthcare systems. And like with adults, there was recommendation about encouraging older adults to exceed the upper limit of the recommended range and to sit less and replace activity with sitting with activity of an intensity, including light activity, indoor, moving around, not necessarily getting out of breath. There was a specific instruction for adults and other adults living with chronic conditions like cancer survivors, people with hypertension, type 2 diabetes, and people with HIV, which is a big problem in sub-Saharan Africa, for example. They're identical to the recommendations of adults, so I'm not going to spend much time on this. And now I would like to share with you a case study. A gentleman who is in his late 70s. He's been suffering, he was diagnosed with severe chronic obstructive pulmonary disease called stage 4, for those who are familiar with this categorization. Only between 25 and 30% of his lung capacity is present. This gentleman is very active in a way. He does up to 10,000 steps per day. He walks on the treadmill for about half an hour a day, and these steps do not count because he's holding the rails. He cannot run for safety. He's holding the reins, so these steps are not recorded by his wrist-worn tracker. He walks the dog. This gentleman, despite all these relatively large amounts of physical activity, does not meet the physical activity recommendations. However, he lives a very good life. He's independent. He drives. He goes to shops. Independent, and he has friends. And a full social life. And I happen to know that gentleman very well because he happens to be my father. I know his clinical progression. And there is no question in my mind, there is no question in his doctor's mind that his exercise routine that he started 4 years ago is what keeps him alive, what keeps him happy, what keeps him enjoying life, living life that is worth living despite his very serious condition. So I would like to, I'm sharing this story with you just to highlight that these guidelines, the guidelines we came up with the WHO, sometimes they're indicative aspirational targets. There will be cases in the population, there will be people, there will be patients who, even with doing some physical activity to their capacity, whatever their capacity is, this is crucial. It's not black and white. It's not that physical activity is beneficial if you meet the guidelines. If you don't meet the guidelines, it's not beneficial. For some people in the population, doing any physical activity, all physical activity counts. Doing any physical activity is important, even if it's of very low intensity, very slow walking, what my father does. We also had recommendations, going back to the WHO recommendations. We had specific recommendations for pregnant women. These were a bit more conservative. There was only one threshold, 150 minutes per week. Obviously, we need to be a bit more cautious. The overall message from the review of pregnant women physical activity literature is that women who are physically active before they get pregnant, there is no reason to slow down. There is no reason to give up physical activity. They should continue being physically active. There is no evidence. There is that perception out there in the community that pregnant women should rest. No, we have a lot of evidence now showing that active mothers during the pregnancy give birth to healthier babies, and there is no risk for the mother, within reason, of course. I would never recommend a pregnant woman to do extreme sports, for example, within reason and common sense. And the guidelines for the recommendations for people living with disability, again, I won't say because they're identical to those for older people, slightly modified activities because of the mobility limitations that chair-bound people, for example, have. So to summarize, and before I close this first session, I would like to share with you the general direction that physical activity recommendations follow in the last few decades. In the 70s and 80s, it was all about vigorous physical activity, vigorous exercise, prescription, 3 times a week, 70% of VO2 max, at least 20 to 30 minutes per session. Then in the 90s, we moved to moderate intensity activity, moderate to vigorous, so fast walking, brisk walking was encouraged. And now, with the most recent evidence, what is the prevalent and the consensus, if you prefer, on the benefits of physical activity is that all physical activity matters. All movement matters. Higher intensity will bring more benefits, but that doesn't mean that lower intensity physical activity, short bouts of physical activity are not beneficial. The key messages by the WHO, perhaps I don't have the time to go through them. I will highlight because I have already mentioned also WHO, when we launched the guidelines, chose to put at the very front of the campaign the message that all physical activity counts, that any amount of physical activity is better than none, which is consistent to the general direction of the field of physical activity that I've just shared with you. And if you want to find out more about the guidelines, there is an awful lot of information on the web. Visit the WHO pages. There is a full report. There is a summary report. There is the background, the summaries of the evidence, a lot of material. But if you prefer a more condensed version of the guidelines, have a look at the British Journal of Sports Medicine, the special issue we published concurrently with the guidelines in November 2020, where you can find the summary of the guidelines plus another 9 very nice papers. They're all freely accessible by anywhere in the world. They're all open access. And now I would like to spend the last, I'm moving to the second part of my talk. I will spend approximately 5 or 6 minutes because I misunderstood the time I would have for the presentation and I have prepared a slightly longer presentation. So please forgive me if I skip a couple of slides. In the second section, I will elaborate a little on where the field of physical activity of kinesiology is going and how this direction, research direction, the future research direction will shape physical activity recommendations in the future. I will refer to the gaps, what we learned from the WHO guidelines. I will talk about occupational physical activity done at work, because we're a bit clear. I will share with you some developments on movement and exercise snacks. I will explain what they are. And I will also talk about using devices to measure physical activity, a very important development, methodological development of our field. And finally, I will describe the 24-hour behaviors movement, 24-hour physical behaviors movement. So starting from what the WHO guidelines told us, what they taught us about what we did not know about physical activity. The guidelines told us that we need to invest more on device-based, on using physical activity, measuring physical activity using devices, do long-term cohorts, larger studies, more trials, invest more on understanding light intensity physical activity, the health benefits of light intensity activity, and the harms of sedentary behavior, in a nutshell. And I will elaborate a bit more now, because all other directions, directly or indirectly, come from this. And then very important, before I move to the next slide, a very important critical gap in the literature is that we don't have enough physical activity research from countries like Indonesia, middle-income countries and lower-income countries. The literature, the research, much of the research, 70, 80, 90%, perhaps, is from US, UK, Scandinavia, Australia, and other European countries, high-income countries. This is not good. This is not good because the WHO guidelines and all other guidelines have no choice but use an evidence base that is not representative of the whole world. And for WHO guidelines in particular, it's very important that they have global coverage. So the first big gap, and what we will be hearing a lot about in the future, is about the physical activity paradox. We have already seen a range of high-profile publications in Lancet, European Heart Journal in 2021. We have one paper under review by a very big medical journal on occupational and health effects of occupational physical activity. The physical activity paradox is about occupational physical activity being harmful for health, or at least for some people, and leisure time physical activity being beneficial. So contrasting effects of activity that is done for fun and is done for work. The physical activity paradox is a hypothesis at this stage. It's not confirmed. But there will be certainly a lot of activity, research activity in this area in the years to come. So, and this is just an example of one of these studies, a very recent European Heart Journal study that showed that physical activity at work increases risk for major cardiovascular events, and physical activity in leisure decreases risk. That was a study in 100,000 Danish workers. The second area is what I mentioned before as movement snacks and or vigorous intermittent lifestyle physical activity, forgive me for the jargon, or VILPA. This is the short bouts, short sessions of high intensity physical activity, vigorous intensity activity happening during our everyday lives. As you can see from the photographs, there is no exercise, there is no gym, there is no park. People get on with their daily activities and they modulate, they increase the intensity by carrying loads, by walking faster, by walking uphill or walking up the stairs. And I'd like to explain to you very briefly what is the public health importance of VILPA, or movement snacks. Assume that you have a middle-aged lady here who doesn't do any exercise, no moderate to vigorous physical activity. By doing 6 to 7 very brief sessions, 30 seconds, half a minute, 1 minute, a minute and a half, 6 to 7 of such sessions per day in her everyday life, walking up the stairs, if she works in an office block, carrying shopping for 1 minute, walking fast to go to the bus stop, she can accrue, that lady, that otherwise physically inactive lady who hates exercise perhaps and hates the gym, she can accumulate 65%, 50 minutes of vigorous, high quality, vigorous intensity activity per week. This is 65% of the recommended by WHO amounts without spending any time, without making any preparations, without spending any money, 65%. So we have invested a lot in this area. We have funding by the National Health and Medical Research Council. And I would like to invite you to check. We have published a paper this year in Sports Medicine about how to do research in this field, because we don't know how to do research. And the reason is that until very recently, we thought that physical activity has to last for at least 10 minutes. That's why we have not invested in this area of research. So now times are changing. Now is the right time to enter this area of research. We are also investing as a research group and the research area as a whole on using devices, wearable sensors, work on the wrist, work on the thigh, work on the waist. So we're moving, the field is moving away from questionnaires. Questionnaires are useful in some contexts still, to using devices that can be worn 24 hours a day, that can give us very, very rich information. For example, here we have a very important study published in 2019 by Wolf Eckeling's group in BMJ, a study that concluded that 6 hours of light-intensive physical activity reduces all-cause mortality by about 50%. And this is the equivalent of the effect you get from approximately 20 to 23 minutes of moderate vigorous physical activity. So the devices, the accelerometry, give us the ability to compare head-to-head different intensities and different types of physical activity with regards to the health effects. And we have a consortium called the PROPAS Consortium, where we chose to use thigh-worn accelerometry devices worn on the thigh because we felt that this provides richer information about not only about physical activity and intensity, but also about posture, sitting, standing, moving, or reclining, so which allows us to extract information about sleep. So the PROPAS is a consortium. There are about 20 studies already from 15 different countries, and we are actively looking to expand the consortium, particularly in lower income countries. I would love to have the opportunity to discuss with Indonesian researchers about the possibility of us supporting you to start a new cohort in Indonesia, a new PROPAS cohort. This is what we do through the consortium. We support new studies to enter this area, to start new cohorts. We want to expand the evidence base outside the Western world, outside Australia, UK, US, and England, and Europe, Scandinavia, which is where most of the evidence currently is concentrated. And as a consequence of all these new directions, we have this comprehensive and thorough paradigm where now we're not talking about only physical activity. We want to understand what is the health effect of the whole 24-hour day, including when we sleep, when we move, when we sit, when we don't move, and when we sleep as well. So this is called the 24-hour physical activity or physical behavior, 24-hour physical behavioral paradigm. There's a society about this. You can find a lot more on this on the internet. We rely on some fairly sophisticated statistics, new area. There are many unknowns. It is complicated, but we're making very steady progress. So that brings me to the end of my talk. So I would like to summarize the key points, what I would like you to remember from this talk, in other words. I know it's a lot of information. I hope I wasn't too fast. The WHO guidelines reflect the great progress we have made in the last 10 years in physical activity research. We've made tremendous progress. We can measure better, we have larger data sets, more studies. There are a lot of exciting developments in the field. However, big gaps remain, and it's our responsibility as researchers to cover them. I would highlight for a third time, for me, the biggest gap in physical activity and sedentary behavior epidemiology is that we don't have evidence from countries like Indonesia, lower and mid-income countries. We need evidence from Africa, South America, Asia, to be able to have a comprehensive set of guidelines that covers, is relevant to the whole of the world. And from a personal perspective, I would like to share with you that is truly, I feel privileged every day. I feel lucky that I am a physical activity researcher at this point in time. It's an extremely exciting time, and I hope that some of you, especially those who decide about doing PhDs, about deciding research direction, I hope that some of you will entertain the possibility of becoming a physical activity researcher at some point. Please get in touch. Terima kasih. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Manos. Give big applause for Prof. Manos. Okay, very interesting, insightful, and inspiring presentation. Thank you so much, Prof. Manos. So how lucky we are, we can learn from the co-chair of the guidelines developing of this the 2020 WHO guidelines. So before we move to the discussion session, I would like to summarize, summarize that Prof. Manos give us why we have guidelines from this WHO, and then these guidelines is comprise for all population from children and adolescents until elderly, also for pregnancy, people with chronic disease, and also people with disabilities. And then the second part, there's an interesting term that we call snacktivity. Yes, snacktivity is a very interesting term. So we snack it with exercise. And also there's a wide open research for we in Indonesia and also in Asia, so we can gather a lot of data and published into the reputable journal, so we can contribute to the guidelines, the next guidelines, like that, Prof. Manos. Okay, I think I guess a lot of question for this presentation. Maybe we open for question and answer. Is there any question for the participant to Prof. Manos?
Yes, I have one quick question.
Okay, please, Naomi.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. It was really great to have your speech. My question is, do you think the accumulative exercise time is still matter, and or that information is also included for updated new guideline?
Accumulated versus continuous. Are you asking about accumulation? So physical activity that is done in many different bouts versus continuous, one continuous session?
Yes, accumulative exercise time, like for 1 week. We divide exercise like 2-3 times, but shorter than
okay.
time.
Yeah, you got it. So frequency, about frequency. How often should we be moving? Okay, so we don't have enough evidence to recommend a specific number of days. So that was the conclusion from the WHO's work. However, we do know that for certain outcomes, particular endocrine and cardiometabolic outcomes, diabetes-related outcomes, frequent physical activity is important. Ideally, for prevention of diabetes, we should be active pretty much every day. There are other outcomes, like all-cause mortality, premature mortality, that the total amount seems to matter more. So it's outcome-specific. I think the key message, if I was a clinician, or if I was to advise the general public, I would say aim to move as often as possible. If you have the option between doing, let's say, 60 minutes on a Saturday or 6 days by 10 minutes, I would advise you to do 6 days by 10 minutes on each day. So provide a repeated stimulus as opposed to one continuous session, and then for the other 6 days of the week, there is no physical activity. That's an extreme example, but I hope that answers your question. Frequent physical activity is better. The WHO guidelines did not cover this specifically.
Okay.
The other reason that they didn't cover it is that we want to give people the flexibility, and we don't want to be prescriptive about when to do it. So the total amount is there. This is how much we recommend. Please exceed it if you can. You'll get extra benefits. Do it whenever you like.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for questions and answers. Maybe the other participant want to discuss with Prof. Manos, maybe? From this chat, there's from Rahma. Prof. Manos, thank you for the writing presentation. If I'm not mistaken, or Rahma, would you like to ask by yourself?
It's okay. I can read it. I can read it.
Okay.
Yeah. So the question is, if there are any guidelines for the maximum duration. So if there is an upper limit above which the risks. So something I did not mention is that, sorry, let me read the rest of the question because there's some. Okay. So the question is about risks of exercise. Is there an upper limit that WHO recommends? The answer is no. We did a review of we commissioned 7 reviews. I didn't mention that. We commissioned 7 original umbrella reviews. One of them was about adverse effects of recreational physical activity, like the physical activity that you mentioned, the kind of physical activity you mentioned in the comment. The epidemiology shows that the more, the better, up to 10 times of the recommended amounts, up to about 1,500 of moderate intensity physical activity or 750 minutes of vigorous intensity physical activity, there are continuous benefits and no evidence of harm. So I know there's quite a lot of literature about sudden cardiac death. So that's a phenomenon that exists and sudden cardiac death during exercise, but there is also sudden cardiac death during rest for a part of the population among young people. So for the majority of the population, it is safe to do vigorous activity, large amounts of vigorous activity, always within reason. You know, there should always be sufficient recovery. We should always be listening to our bodies. But I'm worried. We consider during the WHO guidelines development, we consider how we phrase the risks. If you look at the statistical risk, for example, sudden cardiac death during exercise, we're talking about one event every 300,000 hours of very vigorous exercise at the population level. So it is not that the risk is non-existent, but it's extremely low. Now, if you start you recommend people to do physical activity and you explain that it's beneficial. If you start adding caveats that be careful, there is that risk, that risk, I think there is a risk that the message will be diluted. Of course, people, especially middle-aged people who have not done physical activity and exercise for many years, if they want to start an exercise program, especially vigorous exercise, they should do a checkup. They should consult their cardiologist, they should consult their doctor. This is common sense though. Obviously, you need to be ready to expose yourself to vigorous intensity activity, a heavy exercise load. You need to make sure your body is ready for that.
Manos, let's say if we have to be friendly with our body, like to do vigorous exercise, maybe no guidelines for maximum load. But if we feel very exhausted, so it's not normal for our body. So when we educate the patient or people, can we say, let's be friendly with ourselves, with our body?
Listen to our bodies.
Listen to our
bodies. The other thing is that we should not forget that, again, at the population level, about 40 to 50% of benefit happens by moving people from doing no physical activity to doing half of the recommended amounts. About 40% of the benefit occurs at the very bottom of the distribution. That's why there's no point in encouraging people to do more and more and more. But at the same time, those who want to exceed the guidelines, we should not discourage them. Listen to your body, have common sense, gradual progression of workload. All these principles are valid and important principles. And if we follow those principles and people are aware of these principles, we shouldn't worry about people exceeding the guidelines and doing more vigorous activity if that pleases them, if that gives them pleasure and that's what they enjoy doing.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Prof. Manas. I think the time is up and very nice, insightful, inspiring presentation and discussion. So like in the guidelines, every move it's count and more it's better. Yeah, I think thank you and big applause for Prof. Manas. Thank you, Prof. Manas. Stay fit and healthy. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Supported by
Thank you, Prof. Emmanuel Stamatakis, for the insightful presentation, and also our moderator, Dr. Denny. Ladies and gentlemen, you have heard various lectures from our speaker on the updated knowledge of kinesiology. And after this, we are going to have some time for break. And after the break, you will find out the highlighted symposiums. There will be 4 topics for highlighted symposium. The first one is intersections on exercise, brain function, cognitive function, and metabolism. The second is ergogenic aids for sports performance, contemporary studies from Malaysian sports scientists. The third is bone metabolism, muscular performance, antioxidant status, immune function, and gastrointestinal responses with nutritional supplements and exercise. And the fourth one is sarcopenia. The breakout session will start promptly after the break, so please come back at 11 a.m. GMT plus 7. Thank you. Enjoy your break and see you in the next session.
Supported by
Everything has a reason. When you wake up and open your eyes in the morning, when everything around you is so full of miracle, every colors, cherries, love, all of God's beautiful creations. Every step brings a new discovery. A new hope. To reach happiness. Have you ever thought that everything around you is not just coincidence? That everything was there for a reason. Kindness, people, local wisdoms, rich of cultures and languages, lands and oceans, mountains and valleys, like the diverse flora and fauna, and all beautiful tourism. That never ends their challenges to explore. This place that brings joy to your soul. Too many hidden games, like various types of culinary, who are always waiting to be found. If you view it from your heart. Gunung Kidul, Miracle of Yogyakarta.
A wondrous civilization. Disposed to tranquility. With scenic landscapes bordered by the sea. Here, mythologies become principle. And religions create the cornerstones of life. It is contained in the arts and crafts, where celestial ceremonies become part of popular culture. Legacies of glorious traditions, where folk tales are regarded as guidebooks to perfection, honed over centuries, yet possible to experience within a few hours. Experiences you can take home. Here, art preservation is a tourist attraction. History is a living monument. Even shopping is meaningful. See world-famous resorts compete with local means of accommodation. Enjoy natural kindness. Or the excitement of exploring nature with endless stories to tell and never-ending feasts. Never-ending possibilities to get more out of life and journeys. Yogyakarta. Wonderful.
Supported by
Yunjong Park.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the 11th Asia Conference on Kinesiology and the 5th annual meeting of the Asian Society of Kinesiology. As I mentioned before, we are going to attend a highlighted symposium. There will be 4 breakout rooms for each topic, and let me to tell the topics. The first is intersection on exercise, brain function, cognitive function, and metabolism. The moderator for the highlighted symposium 1 is Dr. Diki Muhrizal, MCAS AIFM, andrologist consultant. The second one, ergogenic aids for sports performance, contemporary studies from Malaysian sports scientists, with the moderator Dr. Santosa Budiharjo, MCAS PA consultant. The third topic is bone metabolism, muscular performance, antioxidant status, immune function, and nutrition and gastrointestinal responses with nutritional supplements and exercise, with the moderator Dr. Widya Wasityastuti, MSc, MEd, ED, PhD. And the fourth one is sarcopenia, with the moderator Dr. Rernat Dr. BJ Istiti Kandarina. Before we start the breakout session, we will invite all of the moderator to take a photo session together. So I would like to invite Dr. Diki, Dr. Santosa, Dr. Widya, and Dr. Istiti Kandarina. You may open the camera and we will take a picture together. Okay, I will count down in 3, 2, 1. Yeah, once more. In 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you very much. So all of the participants, we will start the highlighted symposium. Please enjoy the session.
Supported by